Sweet. So let's talk about storm slabs. And so people are like, all right, strong or weak. And so we can go a lot about storm slabs, and they can have some unique, if you've done a lot of research on storm slabs, there can be a lot of ways they form, but a lot of ways, we're going to talk about the most common first, is when they're not involving a persistent grain. And I often tell my students, one of the most common ways that we get a storm slab avalanche is we get snow falling on a warming trend. And so I might be able to use some examples like, all right, cool, we got all this snow kind of came in. I'm just going to pick some temperatures. Doesn't have to be this. Maybe our storm started falling at like 25 degrees. And as it kept snowing, maybe it warmed up to 27 degrees, right? And so I'll just kind of emphasize like, hey, this 27-degree snow is slightly heavier, slightly denser, slightly more cohesive than this 25-degree snow. And that's why we get a storm slab. And a lot of times students were like, well, man, Ian, like 27-degree snow, like that doesn't seem that different than 25-degree snow. And then that's where you get a chance. And like, it's true. That's why storm slabs tend to be the quickest problem to go away. They can often go away in 24, 48, 72 hours. And our storm slabs will totally heal. If you're giving this as part of a lecture, it's one I hate telling people to wait for later, but I'm like, all right, like, don't worry. We'll talk about how they heal later. Then you can talk about rounding. I do think it's important to make sure, especially for the folks who live in colder snow climates, to talk about like, we can also have a storm slab when we get new snow that's falling on a weak layer. And we'll call it a storm slab for the duration of the storm, because that's what's forming it. So, I'll even talk about, like, we might have a weak layer on the ground, right? Maybe we have a weak layer on the ground, and all of a sudden, this is like super weak snow. These, you can even tell them start using some of those words like facets or servitor. You can, if you think you're more likely to have one in your snowpack, and then we get any snow on top of it, and it'll be like, oh, these snow grains are super weak, and like almost all but the lightest of light new snow is denser. So if this snow pretty quickly can become stronger than our weak surface snow, and that's what's going to give us our storm slab. Cool. I know this one probably has the most variation of what gets called the storm slab in region by region. So cool.